Hi, and welcome to the turbulent world with me, James M. Dorsey, as your host. The United States bunker busting airstrikes against three Iranian nuclear sites raise more questions than answers, fueling a war of narratives as the world waits for what comes next. This weekend, President Donald Trump celebrated the strikes as a spectacular military success in televised remarks even if it was unclear what that means. And despite US intelligence and by implication, the International Atomic Energy Agency's IAEA assessments that Iran was not developing nuclear weapons. Mr. Trump said the targeted sites, Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, had been completely and totally obliterated. Taking a more cautious attitude without contradicting Mr. Trump, U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Dan Caine said damage assessment showed the targeted sites had sustained severe damage and destruction, but would not confirm that they had been obliterated. Instead of listening to the U.S. intelligence community and the international agency, Mr. Trump echoed Israeli claims that Iran was months, if not weeks, away from possessing nuclear weapons, raising the question about who the president listens to, the U.S. intelligence community or Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. On Sunday, Mr. Trump suggested that he shared Mr. Netanyahu's desire for regime change, hours after his Vice President, J.D. Vance, and Secretaries of State and Defense, Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, insisted that the U.S. strikes targeted Iran's nuclear facilities, not the country's regime. It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change? MIGA, Mr. Trump said on Truth Social, his social media platform. Mr. Trump's seeming embrace of regime change could shape how Iran responds to the U.S. strikes, while the administration declared that at the very least, the strikes had significantly set back Iran's nuclear programs. Iranian officials asserted that the United States had failed to destroy Iran's uranium stockpile, including some 410 kilograms enriched to 60% purity. The officials said authorities moved the uranium to safe locations in advance of the U.S. strikes. All enriched materials are in secure locations. We will come out of this war with our hands full, said Major General Mohsen Rezai, a member of Iran's National Security Council and a former commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. It was unclear when Iran moved its stockpile to a secure location. Iranian officials said the United States had informed Iran that it would hit the country's nuclear sites hours before the strikes to make clear that it did not seek a prolonged confrontation with Iran. International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors in Iran haven't been able to verify the location of the country's stockpile of near bomb grade uranium for more than a week. The inspectors last saw Iran's uranium inventory, enough to make 10 nuclear warheads stored underground at the targeted Isfahan atomic facility. Speaking to Al Jazeera, Tariq Rauf, the former head of the IAEA's nuclear verification policy, said the US bombings have complicated tracking Iranian uranium. Mr. Rauf cautioned that it will be now very difficult for the IAEA to establish a material balance for the nearly 9,000 kilograms of enriched uranium, especially the nearly 410 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. In addition to not knowing where Iran's stockpile is, inspectors will no longer be able to rely on environmental sampling to detect the potential diversion of uranium. Now that the sites have been bombed and all classes of materials have been scattered everywhere, the IAEA will never again be able to use environmental sampling. Particles of every isotopic description have infinite half-lives for forensic purposes, and it will be impossible to sort out their origin, said Robert Kelly, who led inspections of Iraq and Libya as an IAEA director. Even so, Iran's problem is that it can't be certain how secure the locations are where the uranium has supposedly been moved to. These will have almost certainly been moved to hardened and undisclosed locations, out of the way of potential Israeli or U.S. strikes, said Daria Dolzikova, a senior research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute, a London-based think tank. If the death on Friday of an unidentified Iranian nuclear scientist, an alleged weaponization specialist, is anything to go by, Iran's uranium may be less secure than the country would like the world to believe. Israel said it killed the scientist in a safe house where he was hiding to escape assassination. He was the 10th nuclear expert assassinated by Israel in the last week. Military analysts note that depending on how deep underground Iran's nuclear facilities are, the U.S. may need several bombings to destroy them, at the risk of being sucked into an expanding regional conflagration. Mr. Trump increased the risk by publicly supporting regime change. In hindsight, Mr. Trump may have anticipated his expression of support when he suggested in his televised remarks that the United States will launch further attacks against Iran if it refuses to return to the nuclear negotiations on his terms, which Iran has repeatedly rejected. Despite Mr. Trump's escalatory rhetoric, Iran is likely to calibrate its response to the U.S. airstrikes carefully. While it is difficult to see Iran forgoing its perceived right to retaliate, it is likely to want to ensure that it does so in a manner that keeps the door open to negotiations. A restrained Iranian response would also cater to advice proffered by its partners, China and Russia, who do not want to see an all-out regional war and are likely to primarily offer Iran political and diplomatic support rather than military participation. Russia and China are sure also to have advised Iran not to make good on threats to block the Strait of Hormuz, a major global trade artery through which much of the world's oil and gas supplies flow, because this would increase the risk of further intervention in the war by the United States and other Western powers. Even so, Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council and a former Russian president, suggested that his country could help Iran build nuclear weapons. The enrichment of nuclear material, and now we can say it outright, the future production of nuclear weapons will continue. A number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads, Mr. Medvedev, widely viewed as a gadfly, said. When asked about Mr. Medvedev's comment, U.S. Vice President Vance was dismissive. I don't know that the guy speaks for President Putin or the Russian government, Mr. Vance said, noting that Russia has been very consistent that they don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Meanwhile, the Iranian parliament voted to close the strait less than 24 hours after the U.S. strikes in a decision that is yet to be approved by Iran's National Security Council. The vote heightened concerns across the Middle East about the fallout from the U.S. strikes. Gulf states await potential Iranian retaliation against U.S. military and diplomatic facilities on their soil. In addition, they will also be worrying about the possible environmental fallout of the U.S. bunker busting bombs, taking out Iranian nuclear facilities. That has not stopped Jordan and Saudi Arabia, despite their expressions of concern, from helping Israel intercept Iranian missiles fired at the Jewish state. Sirens regularly warn residents of the Jordanian capital Amman about overflying missiles. Jordan frequently intercepts at least some of those missiles. while Saudi Arabia has reportedly allowed Israel to shoot missiles down in its airspace. Turkey and Iraq dread an expected influx of Iranian refugees if hostilities continue, or even worse, expand. Together with Pakistan, Iraq, and Azerbaijan, Turkey worries about the potential spillover effect of possible unrest among ethnic Iranian minorities, like the Kurds, Arabs, and Baloch, that straddle their borders. For their part, Egyptians fear that war is inevitable amid growing concern that Israel could attempt to drive Gaza's Palestinian population out of the Strip and into Egypt's peninsula. The question on everybody's mind is, will an expanding conflict envelop the Middle East? And if so, can it be contained to the region? The answer will likely depend on Iran's response to the U.S. strikes and whether it strikes at U.S., Israeli, and or Jewish targets elsewhere in the world, or lets Israel carry the brunt of its retaliation. Thank you for joining me today. The Turbulent World with James M. Dorsey seeks to empower readers, listeners, and viewers to form informed opinions of their own. Equitable, fair, and honest analysis that lets the chips fall where they fall has seldom been more important in a world racked by brutal wars, unimaginable humanitarian crises, and increasing authoritarianism. If you share this vision, please consider becoming a paid subscriber by going to jamesmdorsey.substack.com. The Turbulent World can only sustain and expand its independent coverage, free of advertisements and clickbait, with the support of its readers. Thank you for your support and loyalty. Take care and see you soon.